The following is a special presentation of the PDF Sports Network.
You know, I'm right. The podcast that uncovers the origin stories of some of the biggest names in sports and entertainment. Nick Durst here, along with Joe Calabrese and Joe. Our guest today, synonymous with baseball in New York, and we've had many of his colleagues on with us, so we're really excited to have him on our program here today.
Yes, he's a longtime columnist and current contributor for SNY. And like you alluded to, we've had many actually of his great colleagues on. And we've also had people on who once upon a time were contributors for SNY who are no longer contributors for SNY. So we're really, really happy to have him on. We've finally been able to get him. John Harper. John, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good, guys. Good to be here and looking forward to it.
All right. So, John, you've accomplished so much in your career, or at least in our opinion and many others, but I'm sure you'll be humble about that. But we'll take you back to the beginning here. When did you decide that you wanted to pursue a career in sports journalism?
Once I realized I was not going to be the next shortstop for the Yankees, that was pretty much the turning point. No, I always, I grew up with sports. I played baseball and basketball in high school, played baseball in college, and I kind of reached the end of the road. Although I did go, and this kind of delayed my entry into New York. I worked in New Jersey for years at the Morristown Daily Record, which at one time, before Gannett took it over, used to cover New York sports almost the way a New York paper did. I got to do a lot of things at an early age, cover Super Bowls and NCAA Final Fours, things like that. But anyway, I stayed there for almost 10 years because I was playing fast pitch softball on a team that traveled around the country. This team called the Franklin Cardinals, formerly the Ray Bestis Cardinals, which was a famous name. Fast pitch softball once upon a time was a pretty big sport. It's no longer the case. But we traveled around the country and played, and I got to win a national championship in 1983. So that was fun. But anyway, to get back to your question, I did major in journalism in college. A high school English teacher told me, I had never really thought much about it. But she told me she thought I wrote well and she should think about pursuing writing. So I decided to major in journalism. Went to the University of Bridgeport, played baseball there. I got some money to go there. So I went there and played baseball. Started doing some writing for the school paper there. Got an internship at that Morristown Daily Record in Jersey. And then, eventually playing fast pitch softball. I actually played, the last year I played a team from Detroit recruited me. And I was flying to Detroit or wherever they were playing in the Midwest every weekend from New Jersey. It got to be a little much. And finally my wife said, enough's enough. And I went and took a job the next year with the Post covering the Mets in 88 was the first year on the beat. I'd been around the Mets before that as a columnist in New Jersey, but that was the first year on the beat. And then pretty much been in New York ever since.
What position did you play in fast pitch softball?
Short and second, mostly second base, which was you've probably seen the women's game. It's similar to the men's. The guys throw harder. Yeah. I mean, the pitching, unless you've seen it, it's really hard to understand how hard it is to hit it. I was a pretty good college hitter, made all New England, things like that. But if I was hitting 250 in fast pitch softball at the level, there's different levels of it, but at this level, that was pretty good. But at second base, it requires a lot of quickness because you have to cover all the bunts at first, not only in sacrifice situations, but the first and third baseman play up a lot. So you have to be there even when guys are just trying to bunt for a hit. So that's why that team from Detroit recruited me. It wasn't like I was a big time hitter, but the defensive part of it was a big piece of it. So they were trying to build a kind of an all-star team to win a championship. But so the year I played there, the pitcher who they had brought in from Seattle, who had won a championship, got hurt. And so we didn't get very far in the Nationals. And so the guy said, that's it. I'm not spending this kind of money again. So that was another reason that I had kind of come to an end of a road for fast pitch softball.
How would an SNY slow pitch softball team fare in a game?
In a game against fast pitch?
Slow pitch, fast pitch, yeah, whatever. I guess slow pitch, fast pitch. Nobody's gonna touch it.
Yeah, that's different. I have played the last. Well, I missed a few because of COVID and everything else, but SNY does have an annual softball game out at this Coney Island Stadium,
And
where their minor league team plays,
Cyclones, yeah.
and we play on the carpet there. It's a lot of fun, and got some good athletes there actually. So we have a good time, but they're not challenging to win any kind of championships on that team. I don't think.
John, Nick and I play on a slow pitch softball team, and we have not won a championship in 2 straight years, even though we went to the championship. So do you have
Nice.
anything left in those legs of yours? Maybe we can help us out a little bit. The only thing is my preferred position is second base. And as they can attest to, I'm pretty good defensively there. What do you think?
Tell about that double play returns this past year.
Oh boy. So we actually play some of our games in South Beach, right, which is right by the Verrazano Bridge. And Nick ended up playing a game over there with Craig Carton's son, right?
Yeah.
So we got to meet Carton there that day. And so we played a game over there at South Beach, and there was a play where there was a grounder, was playing second. It was kind of hit to my right. Nick was playing short, and that's a position that he doesn't usually play because usually he pitches. He's pretty good. And if he doesn't pitch, he'll either play first base spot duty or play outfield spot duty. Mostly he pitches. And Nick that day had to play short because we were really severely men down. And I ended up going to the right to try to make a play. And the ball took a funky in-between hop, bounced off my calf, and it kind of popped right to Nick, who was coming from short, covering second because there was a runner on first. And it was one of those freak things where it was like a Baseball Tonight web gem kind of worthy play.
Yeah.
It bounced right to him. Nick fired it to first. It was a double play. And all the guys on the other team, they were like, "What the hell just happened?" And it was once in a lifetime type of play where Nick and I were like, "Wait, did that really just happen?" And that was the closest I think I've been to making an error in 2 years. I think there was maybe one other time where I booted like a dunker kind of like shallow fly ball. But other than that, I'm pretty good. Nick, what would you say?
I think you're an excellent catcher. But yeah, we 2 championship losses in a row, unfortunately. So we'll get back.
Oh man,
we got to start recruiting some former athletes from Major League or something next year.
Yeah, well, I enjoy slow pitch. I mean, it's nothing like fast pitch, but I enjoy it as long as it's not that unlimited arc. I can't stand the unlimited arc where the ball's coming almost straight down.
We do like modified. It's got to be straight. Paint the corners.
Oh, there you go.
But some of the guys sling it. I don't know. They're banned from higher competition. They come play slow pitch and they're still throwing too hard. And I'm like, can't deal with this.
Yeah, I like that though. The harder the better. That's real softball now.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, no, that's fun. Do you get is there bunting and stealing too, or just
nobody really bunts. Yeah, and nobody really steals. I mean, I don't think there's a rule against it, but everybody takes a healthy lead, and nobody really does that.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you ever need somebody, I can fill in once in a while.
There you go. We got a couple of people on recently who could help us fill in, so that's good. It makes us feel good.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll get back on script here. So you mentioned that you got a job in '88 covering the Mets. Was that your first job out of college? You said.
No, I worked in New Jersey for really, I guess it was about 10 years at the Morristown Daily Record. Then it went to the Post. Was on the Mets beat at the Post, which was that was a high profile beat to step into. The Mets, guys your age probably don't remember, may not even believe it, but the Mets ruled the town in those days. They were, the Yankees were going through a little bit of it. They were good, but nothing like they are now or every year. And the Mets, that team with all the personalities in the championship, they won in '86. I mean, that team was just the talk of the town, toast of the town. And so stepping into that beat, it was pretty high profile position. So I kind of learned quickly on the job. I mean, I'd written for years, but I had never experienced that kind of pressure of having to, you know, deliver on the against competition in New York, because that is high intensity competition when you're on the beat like that. So I was I'm on the beat there for 5 years. Went to the Daily News and covered the Yankees for 1 year, and '93, which just happened to be the year Steinbrenner came back from suspension, and then got bumped up to be a baseball columnist at the Daily News, and then I worked as a baseball columnist for up until 2018, when I was part of the massive layoff there. Although I did go and cover the football Giants for 3 years, 98, 99, 2000, when my kids were kind of at an age where I wanted to be able to coach them in Little League and things like that. And football is just much more conducive. Covering football is much more conducive to a family kind of lifestyle. It's more of a nine to five existence. So I enjoyed that, but the writing, covering football from a writing standpoint, it doesn't compare. It kind of gets stale because, let's face it, there's only one game a week and there's not a lot going on during the week. So I did go back to baseball in 2001, and then been doing baseball ever since.
So 1988, I mean, you're 10 years into the business, and now you're walking into a clubhouse with some of the biggest names in the sports or in baseball, talk of the town of New York, all the crazy stories that came out of that team. So what do you remember about that first season on the Mets beat, or really just the first time you were going in the clubhouse, and how hard was it for you to make connections, to kind of get guys to speak to you for stories and stuff?
Yeah, it was a little bit intimidating because I had been around them, but they didn't, unless you're there and they're seeing your work in the paper, things like that. They didn't really put the connection together when I was in Jersey and being around. But so walking in there when I'm at the Post, it was a little intimidating because of, as you said, all those big personalities. But I kind of pretty quickly, that when they start seeing, because at that time, more so than now, newspapers were a bigger deal. They were in the clubhouse all the time. So they pretty quickly got to see what you wrote. And if you were critical, you had to be there to answer for it. And so you go through some periods where you're going to have guys get in your face a little bit and question what you wrote, especially more so in those days because there weren't as many cameras around. I think players are a little more reluctant to do that now. So it was pretty quickly trial by fire. But that, it was really, once I kind of settled in, it was just such a great team to cover because there was the personalities, they were just so colorful and so magnetic in some ways. And they love to talk. Those guys love to talk. We always used to joke that, because before games, night games, you had to write an early edition story for the papers that went to like Boston and Florida, things like that. So you had to have a story done on something before the game even started. And so you go into that clubhouse, and some days, it's a long season, there's not much going on. But we used to joke, basically, they took care of it for you because, you walk by their locker and somebody would basically trip you and say, hey, I feel like talking today. Whether it was Dykstra or Backman or Strawberry or, not Doc as much, not Gooden as much, but Keith Hernandez, Gary Carter. I mean, those guys, they all love to talk. And they weren't shy about expressing opinions, and they had the perfect manager for that because Davey Johnson, he didn't mind guys expressing their opinions even if they disagreed with the manager. And Davey he always said he liked to create a little bit of tension in the clubhouse himself, so he would criticize players. Remember, he used to get on Darling, especially that first year I was on the beat. He thought Darling, was too fine, tried to be too perfect with his pitches. I think he might have led the league in walks that year. He'd criticize him. Darling would fire back. Davey would fire back at him. And, if you're on the beat and you're recording, you're going from Davey's office to Darling's locker. And sometimes you double back to Davey's office if Darling said something critical of Davey. So, I mean, you never lacked for story ideas there because there was so many big news events and so many big games and so many colorful personalities. And Hernandez, it all centered around Hernandez. You might have seen that documentary this year that SNY put out about him. He was such a charismatic figure, and he was a brilliant guy at breaking down games. So he was always almost always the first stop in the clubhouse after a game. He'd talk about what wouldn't happen in a game. He loved it. He loved breaking it down. And he'd sit there. I mean, these days are long gone too. He'd sit there in his locker with a champagne stand with full of ice and like 2 or 3 beers in there, and he'd be drinking his beers as wave after wave of reporter would come to his locker. And then you learn too, after the group interviews, if you had something you wanted to go back to him, he was fine with that. Once he had come to know you and trust you a little bit, he didn't mind going off the record and telling you what he thought about this or that, things that he might not want to say publicly. So you had to have Hernandez as a kind of a source to really know what was going on with that team. So it was one of the most fun years I ever had covering baseball. And that team should have won. They should have won the LCS against the Dodgers.
Yep.
Should have gone on to the World Series. It would have been a great matchup against the A's. But some circumstances in that '88 LCS, the David Cohn ghostwritten story caused a major problem. Probably cost him a win. And then you just had that freakish Socia home run off Doc Gooden, changed everything as well. But that was my introduction to being on the beat, and it was a fun year, a lot of pressure because you had to deliver stories and you had to kind of come up with not necessarily scoops, but stuff that other people didn't always have. And it was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun.
So you touched on this briefly, kind of the process of writing stories after the games, getting that out for certain editions of the paper. That's obsolete now with everything on how everything has been digital. So what was your routine like going to the ballpark then? And how do you think that routine ultimately changed through the years of covering the teams?
It didn't really change that much because, and believe it or not, I know just talking to guys who are still at the Post, I was talking to a guy recently, they still do those early edition stories because even though, I mean, I don't have newspapers. I don't read newspapers anymore. I read everything digitally like most people do, but they do still send newspapers to Florida, to out of state. And they say, this guy was telling me, they say they still make money on them. So their writers still have to come up with early edition stories. But anyway, so I would, typically get to the ballpark about 3:00. Clubhouse would open, 3:30 or something, 4 hours before the game, something like that. And in those days, you had pretty much complete access before the game. The clubhouse was open till they went out for BP, and then it would open again after BP, which doesn't happen anymore. So you had a lot of time in there. You got more time to really kind of get to know players on a one-on-one basis, which is harder these days because players are just much more cautious about everything. To some degree, it's understandable with all the social media stuff, but they've also been trained now from the time they signed. The team is much more hands-on with their PR and everything else in terms of trying to make them media savvy. So they're not willing to be as expressive and as opinionated as they were really in 20, 30, 40 years ago. And so, but anyway, so that would be, you come up with some kind of early edition story. You would write that before the game. Sometimes it would be newsworthy if something was going on with a player in terms of injury or something else. And then you would write, I would write we call it a running story during the game, which would be filed right at the end of the game. So you'd have to have it's kind of play by play, but you'd figure out ways to bring in maybe something you had written earlier or make it interesting in some way just beyond what exactly was happening in the game. And you file that right at the end of the game, then go downstairs and get a story after the game. Usually kind of totally rewrite the story based on quotes and talking to players about what happened during the game, whether it was a key play or whatever, and then come back upstairs and write again. So really, a lot of times you're writing 3 separate stories in a night, plus usually a notebook on different items going on with the team. And so it was a long day. The beat guys put in a ton of work, man. I still to this, it's probably harder now because of Twitter and everything else and the immediacy of all the breaking news. But it was a long day. So, you get home from a night game. Typically I'd get home, maybe 12:30, 1:00 in the morning. And then get up and do it all again the next day if you had a series of night games in a row. So it's hard work. That's why you usually get a lot of time off, comp time, and everything else in the off season, try to make up for it.
How rough is it when you do a Saturday night game and then a Sunday day game? How's that turnaround?
Yeah, sometimes you feel like a catcher. You need that day off, the day game after a night game.
Yeah.
But you got used to it. You got used to lack of sleep, and you did at home. You would usually get some days off at home during a homestand because you would typically the beat guy is always on the road for all the road games, so they don't expect you to cover. The sports editor, even rough, tough sports editors don't expect you to cover 162 games. So you would get some time off at home. It's more so on the road, but really as a beat guy, you loved being on the road because it's just a lot easier to work. And typically the size of the media contingent is cut in half or more so because you don't have kind of the guys at the home clubhouse, guys like me now, who I'm pretty much only in the home clubhouse. On the road, you would have your basic group of beat guys, which might have been 7 or 8 guys at a time. And it was just a lot easier. Players were more likely to be in the clubhouse and make themselves available if they knew they weren't going to get bombarded by people, especially by people they didn't know. So that's where you really put in the days in a row on the road. And then, you would get a break here and there at home. But, man, there were times, it felt like I was married then. I had young kids. It was difficult in that lifestyle. It's a great lifestyle, I think, if you're single, and the travel is a lot of fun. You're staying in good hotels, but it does wear on you after a while. Sometimes you would feel like you just got home and unpacked, and now you're packing again to go on another road trip. So it does wear you down after a while. It's a young man's job. That's why I don't do it anymore.
Long days, long nights. So it's definitely important for you to stay, hydrated and eating food. So that's a big part of the beat reporter's, responsibility there to keep themselves alive, alert, full of energy. So for you, what would you be eating at the ballpark? Was there certain times in the game or before the game, after the game that you want to eat? And then also, which ballparks that you visited have the best food for the press?
That was always the way we rated ballparks. Usually was by accommodations in the press box and the food in the press box. But let me go back real quick. I just want to, when I was talking about, it does wear on you covering baseball, but it's by far to me the most interesting sport to cover. And I have covered some other sports over the years because there's always, in baseball, there's always decisions on a daily basis that you can kind of break down, second guess, whatever it makes for interesting writing, and whether you're second guessing a manager or whatever. Anyways, that made it fun. But to your point, even back then, I surely didn't eat as well as I should have back then. When I was younger, I wasn't as worried about it. But we always, the guys on the beat, in the Mets especially, we made a point. We used to like to play basketball on the road in other cities. We would go to the local Y, whether it was in St. Louis, Pittsburgh, some other places, and kind of play against the local guys, which is always interesting because different games in different cities, you kind of had to figure out how the game was being called. And, in some places, guys called fouls and everything. Other places, they didn't call anything. You had to get used to it. I'll tell you a quick story, though. One time in 92, probably it was May or June, we went to St. Louis, and David Cohn was still a Met then. He was on his way to becoming a free agent after that year. And, in those days, which was another huge change compared to now, we would sometimes end up, in the same bars at night after the game for a beer or a sandwich or whatever as the players. And, it was kind of a casual thing. Once they got to know you, they knew you weren't looking to spy on them, what they were doing. So you had a relationship with them, and they might buy you a beer or whatever. So one night we're in a place, and Cohn comes over and he's talking to a group of us, the writers, and he hears us talking about we're going to play basketball tomorrow, the next day. And he goes, I'm playing basketball, you guys. I want to play. Now, Cohn had a few beers by then. We're going, Coney, you can't play basketball. You're going to be a free agent at the end of the year. What if you break your ankle? He goes, I don't care. I'm playing basketball. You guys, okay. And so we figured, okay, whatever. He's just, he's talking because he's had a few beers. He'll forget about it. So we go to leave maybe an hour later, and he sees us leave, and he comes over. Don't forget, call me in the morning. I'm going to play basketball with you guys. So now we got to at least call him. So we call him in the morning, and he picks up in his room. He says, yeah, I'm coming. So we're like, oh, my God, I can't believe this. So sure enough, he comes over with us, and he's a pretty good player. He played in high school. And we figure, all right, as long as he doesn't do anything crazy, we'll get through these and get out of here. But that wasn't Coney. If you saw him pitch and stuff, he was a lot of intensity. So he gets into this game, and the next thing you know, he's squaring off with one of the big local guys from St. Louis, and they're pushing and shoving, calling each other names, that I can't repeat here necessarily. And we go, oh my God. So we jump in between, and these local guys didn't even know who he was, because Cone wasn't really a big guy. If you didn't know who he was, you wouldn't think necessarily he was a professional ball player. So Cone's screaming at the guy, I'll kill you. We separate him. We go, and we've been playing probably, I don't know, half hour. By then we said, we got to get out of here. We got to get him out of here, And so we got him out, because we can only imagine. I mean, if that had happened these days, somebody would have got on Twitter. It would have been a huge story. We all would have been in trouble for playing with Cone and all this kind of thing. But in those days, we were able to get by it. And we still to this day, I laugh when I talk to Cone about it. He says, hey, he says, I just wanted to play. And he did. He had fun with it. And then, it wasn't, he was one of the all-time greats, by the way, to cover on the beat, because he was so candid, so honest, and we hated to see him go. He was traded, a month or two later by the Mets. One of the big mistakes they made in those years. But anyway, so finally then, to get to your point, that our favorite ballparks in those days, Philly, the food was always great in Philly. The Vet was a terrible place to cover games, but it was they always had great food, and they had the best ice cream in baseball. What was it? Another one? I think the Dodgers food was always really good. Not Dodger dogs, but they had really good food in the press dining room. And actually, it's funny, in those days, the food in the press room was free. So we used to load up, and then eventually, probably sometime in the 90s, maybe, they started charging for food, which was fine. We didn't mind that, as long as they're giving us good, because some places the food was terrible. I'm trying to think, Wrigley Field for one, the food was never good. But those are two of the places that come to mind as far as having the best food, were Philly and LA.
Incredible stuff there. Imagine if 2 years ago, Noah Syndergaard was playing basketball with the Mets beat reporters. It would be the biggest story there is, and he would be destroyed. So it's crazy, how things differ now. And, for you, for a while, you had to go through that transition period where everything went really social. Now, how did you, thread the thin line, especially with your editor, between if you had a breaking news, tweeting it out, versus we got to get this article up on the website before we can send anything out there?
That became a big deal in the business. We actually had the last editor I had at the Daily News was insistent, if something, even if if a manager said something that was major newsworthy in a pregame press conference, and everybody was tweeting it, he didn't want you to tweet it out until you had a link up that would direct people to the website, because obviously it was all about getting people to the website. And so we used to argue, let us tweet about it, because we're getting beat just in terms of the tweets by everybody else. Let us tweet about it and say, story to come or something like that. But we never won that argument. And I thought it was a mistake, but obviously the Daily News, especially now, and I mean then and even now, going through hard times financially and trying to find a way to make money off the website, it's just a hard thing, because most places, and I think the Daily News is one of them, they have paywalls now, and people are reluctant to pay for that copy, even though before all this happened, everybody would plunk down their 50 cents or $1 for a newspaper or whatever. but people are reluctant to pay for it. It seems like on websites. So it's become a tricky thing, and that's part of the problem. That's why newspapers have died and gone away to a large extent, and places are trying to figure out a way that they can make money off it. And it's a very difficult thing. You can sell advertising and all that, but compared to the advertising they used to sell in the actual physical newspapers, it just doesn't compare. So, but that idea of tweeting versus getting something on the website became a major sticking point, especially the last few years when I was in working for the Daily News.
Sure. And it's still, something that we've had many writers on that they still battle with, but it seems like, most people like your thought process was like, you got to at least tweet it out because we're going to get beat. Someone's going to tweet it out. So at least got to
Right.
get it out
Yeah.
there. So it says, so-and-so from here, it gets the credit. And then that's what you'll see on the networks. But it's pretty crazy to think about how things have changed. For you, how did the jump happen from the Post to the Daily News? Was there any sort of somebody coming to you saying, hey, we got this opening, or was that something you seeked out?
It kind of a combination. It's actually 92. So 92 was the last year I was on the beat, the Mets beat. And that was the year that I, myself and Bob Klapisch wrote the book, The Worst Team Money Could Buy, which became pretty famous at the time because we wrote about, the publisher signed us to write the book before the season because the Mets they went into that season with the highest payroll in baseball, which was only 45 million then, which tells you how different things are now. But they had signed Bobby Bonilla, so this publisher had the idea of having us chronicle the season, what they thought was going to be a championship season. And our idea of it was to do that, but also get inside the actual we call them tabloid wars, and what it was like to actually compete on the beat against each other. So there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff, things like that. What it was like to cover a team, especially cover those Mets teams over the years, not just 92, but the teams in the 80s leading up to what we ended up kind of calling the collapse of the Mets. And so that was kind of how we started with that book and that idea. And that book became kind of a big deal because it went places that nobody else had gone in years. And so kind of at happenstance, Klapisch was at the News, I was at the Post, and they were moving him up to baseball columnist for the 93 season. And so Klapisch asked me if I wanted to consider coming over to the News. And, hadn't really thought of it at the time, but I didn't think the book was going to be as much of a big deal as it became. We were pretty rough on some of the guys that were bad to us, guys, or not just bad to us, but uncooperative, difficult to cover, like Bobby Bonilla, Vince Coleman, Eddie Murray, Kevin McReynolds, some of those guys. But we were really good to a lot of the other guys that we'd covered over the years. But it became controversial because we were critical of Jeff Torborg, some of the things he did. Anyway, so as it turned out, the opening came and I went to the News and I was there. So I was there starting in February of 93, and probably a good thing because the book created kind of a firestorm, and I wasn't in that clubhouse to answer for it, which wasn't my intention because I was expecting to be. But the News was a more stable situation at the time. The Post was having a lot of financial difficulties. At least it seemed to me that the News was more stable. So I went there. And Klapisch went to become baseball columnist, and he had to deal with some of the fallout from the book where I really didn't have to. He got into kind of a famous confrontation with Bobby Bonilla, which was caught on video, which you still see from time to time. MLB Network plays it, where Bonilla kind of challenged him and uttered the famous something like, "I'll show you the Bronx" line or something like that. So he had to answer for that, and I was over covering the Yankees. So it worked out all right for me, although I was back on the Mets covering, doing a column next year. So I still dealt with some of that, but Torborg was furious because he was the manager of the 92 team and he was not a good manager. And we kind of laid out all the problems he had, kind of some of the stupid things. He tried to, that team still had a lot of the veterans who had been through the 80s. He tried to treat him like kind of a college team. He tried to enforce a no drinking rule on the team playing on road trips. And these guys are like, "Are you kidding me?" So naturally, they instead of just having maybe a couple of beers now they're sneaking booze on to the plane and drinking it, out of the paper cups or whatever. And that just created a bad environment. And they clashed from day one. And so we wrote about some of that stuff, and he was furious with us. And still hasn't gotten over that, I don't think. But it was all true. He was fired the next year. Al Harrison, who was the GM, was fired the next year. And basically, I know Torborg got one more shot, I think, with the Marlins, but neither of them did anything in baseball. So the book shined a light on their inadequacies, if you will. And anyway, that's a long way of saying that's how I got to the news in '93.
So you've been around a lot of colorful personalities, and being around a lot of colorful personalities lends itself to a lot of memorable press conference and other types of press events. So off the top of your head, what were some of the most memorable press conferences or other events that you covered?
Well, let me go back to the beginning just real quick, because when I broke into the business in summer '77, I was doing an internship at the Marshtown Record after I got out of college. And they let me go to some with the beat writer for the Yankees, Joe Sullivan at the time, who later became the Boston Globe sports editor. And I got my first taste of what it was like to cover it. And Billy Martin was managing that Yankees team. And so we go into Billy Martin's office after the game, and there were no cameras in there after the game. This was, a different lifetime ago, basically. And he had a couple of guys in particular, but it could have been anybody, but a couple of guys really he had it in for. And if they asked a question about why he made this move, why he made that move, he would just go off on them and start calling them every name in the book. And I'm sitting there as a 22-year-old kid going, what is going on here? I am never asking Billy Martin a question in my life. And it just scared the heck out of me. So that was kind of an introduction into the business. And then that following spring, I guess, the guy who had been covering the Knicks left. And so I was put on the Knicks beat briefly. And my all-time idol growing up was Pete Maravich, because I played high school. I was kind of a flashy passing high school point guard. And so that was Pistol Pete's era, the early '70s. And so I get the Jazz are in town, and I get to go to he's holding the kind of a press conference before the game, talking about he had re-signed with the Jazz as a free agent, and they were a pretty bad team at the time. So I'm standing there. It was more informal, but probably a group of 10 or so reporters talking to him, and he's complaining about the state of the Jazz. They're not spending enough money to build a contender. And so I'm feeling brave. I asked him, why, if you knew the kind of the state of this team, why did you resign as a free agent rather than become a free agent, maybe go somewhere else? Well, he didn't like the question, and he took it out on me. He said, where the F have you been? British. I always remember British Honduras. He goes, where the F have you been? British Honduras? I said, British. He goes, I've answered that question every time I haven't asked it. Why are you asking me again? He just railed on me for a few minutes. Man, I wanted to disappear under the floor somewhere. And that really, it was kind of, it was so embarrassing to me. And I'm like, really, do I really want to be in this business? Because this guy was my idol, and he's just crushing me. And I was mortified, because all these other guys, these reporters who I didn't really know, they're probably looking at me like, who the hell is this dumb kid, And it did for years. For a few years there, I was uncertain if I wanted to stay in the business, because I thought, do I really want to do this? But I stuck with it. So those were a couple early on. I guess later, the Bonilla press conference when he signed always stands out to me, because he came on and he was trying to be, really this guy. He wanted to be the savior for the Mets, and he wanted to present himself. He had grown up in the Bronx, and he wanted to present himself as this New York guy who was there to save the team, going to live up to the contract and all that. And he had the famous line, I know I always have this smile on my face. I know you guys are going to try and knock it off, but I always have this smile on my face. And within about a month of that first season, the smile was gone, because, he was not ready. And in those days, he wasn't, that's where PR people are much more available now to kind of prepare these guys for what they're going to face, especially in New York. He put earplugs in his ears because he didn't like he was off to a tough start and getting booed, and he told us about it, the reporters about it, which so you're going to write about it, and he's kind of he's just going to create more booing. And he did things like, he called the press box during a game one time to complain about an error in right field. And, somehow we got wind of that. And so it just stupid things like that. But every little thing created more of a blow up. And in New York, those little things turn into huge things and they follow you around, and they just made hit for him. I mean, if you're hitting 300 and you're doing everything right on the field, then it doesn't matter as much. But when you're off to a tough start, a little bit like we saw with Lindor last year, he didn't understand. He wasn't ready for the booing when he got off to the tough start. He was very sensitive about it, and then he was part of that whole thumbs down thing with Baez because he resented the way the fans were treating him. And so sometimes even now, even though these guys, the PR people try to prepare them for what they're going to face, it's still a different deal coming to New York. And dealing with some of this stuff. So those are a couple of them. Terry Collins was a fascinating figure for me to cover because his press conferences, he was the most candid, the most refreshing guy that I've ever covered. And especially in this later era where there was cameras on all of his press conferences, because he would still give you some raw emotion, give you, you probably remember after the night that we all thought Wilmer Flores was traded, and because Sandy Alderson hadn't really filled in Terry what was going on. Some of it was happening during the game. They had made a deal with the Brewers. After the game, there's Terry asked him about it. He goes, "Who got traded?" And said, Wilmer for Flores. He goes, "For who? For what?" He's just expressing this emotion like a fan, like he had no idea. And he was great to cover. He still does work on SNY with us on that Baseball Night in New York show. So I guess a lot of the press conferences. And then there's always the Randy Johnson one where he tried to, way to his first press conference in New York because he didn't like the question, the guy stopping him in the street. It's always those kind of guys who were living on the edge. They could be difficult to deal with, but they were always the most interesting to cover.
So we'll do the other side of the spectrum now. And obviously, people that we've had on the show before have commented on Terry and his candidness and his friendliness and just a very warm person. So he must have been very, very helpful to you. But who are some of your other favorite people that you got to interview and work with writing stories through the years?
Yeah, I mentioned Cone earlier. Cone was the greatest because, he was a star and yet he was very candid. He actually had talked about how he had thought about becoming a sports writer at some point before he became a professional baseball player. He kind of was really interested in it. So he understood what we were trying to do. And, I remember even in the night in Atlanta when he covered first base and the umpire called the runner safe because said he missed the base, and Cone arguing with the umpire. I mean, Charlie Williams was the umpire, arguing with the umpire, completely oblivious to the fact that the Braves runners were circling the bases, 2 runs scored as he was arguing with the ump. And I think it was Greg Jeffries was trying to grab the ball out of his hand. And then Cone afterwards was at his locker, as always, and admitting to his mistake and kind of trying to, he was embarrassed about it and yet saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not going to apologize for who I am. That's my emotion." So he's one for sure. Mattingly, with my 1 year on the Yankee beat in '93, was a great guy to cover. Just a classy guy. He was a little bit reserved. I didn't know him that well, but I just admired the way he played, the way he conducted himself after games, and so he was fun to cover. I guess in more recent years, I mean, David Wright was, he was as classy as they come. Always enjoyed talking to him, and he kind of understood too. He understood the business, and not everybody does. Believe me, they don't understand that. You got to be critical at times, and but he did appreciate. He was going through. He struggled. I think it was I think it was the '06 postseason, and he was struggling a little bit. Some early on that postseason, and but yet he was first guy at his locker. So, oh, sorry, I got something going on my phone. So he was at his locker, And I wrote that, yes, he's struggling, but he's there. After first guy at his locker, he's answering all the questions, doing everything the right way. Somehow he saw that, and so he appreciated that, and we developed a good relationship from there. And that doesn't always happen because some guys just don't get it. I mean, it was kind of a famous story for us anyway when we wrote that book about the '92 team. But we talked to Tim McCarver, who he became really famous as the guy who was willing. One of the first guys on a home broadcast team who was willing to be critical of players. And it got to the point where when Eddie Murray came over in '92, McCarver went to shake his hand in spring training and introduce himself. And Murray said, he wouldn't shake his hand. He just looked at him and said, "I know who you are. You're the butcher." And McCarver's like, "The butcher?" He thought he was kind of making a joke about his hands behind the plate when McCarver's days as a catcher. And he goes, yeah. And he goes, but then he realized, no, Murray was dead serious. Maybe he had heard from some other teammates that McCarver would be critical. And he goes, no, I know who you are. You're the butcher. And McCarver just said, "Hey, if that's the way you feel about it, fine." And, the way he explained it to us when we interviewed him about that, because we actually witnessed that. I witnessed it behind the cage one day in spring training. So I asked him about it. And he said, "Listen, to me, if you're never critical of a guy or a player or whatever, then the praise is meaningless. You have to have criticism for praise to be meaningful." And I think that was always something that stuck with me as something that, as a writer, you could kind of hang on to, because you're going to have tough days. If you were honest and you did the job right, and you had to be critical at times, but you're going to have to answer for that criticism in the clubhouse because you had to be in there almost all the time. And so, you were going to get confronted. I was actually, one of the times I thought I was going to get into a physical confrontation was with Howard Johnson, believe it or not, one of the nicest guys on the Mets. But he was having a lot of trouble. I think it was maybe '89. He was having trouble making the throws from third base to first, and it became kind of a mental thing, a little bit like what Knobloch went through with the Yankees. And so early in the season, he made a couple of errors, the first week of the season. And, so I'm just writing a game story afterwards, and I'm talking to players and actually talking to one of the guys who was close to him on the team. And the guy says, by that time I had a relationship when he kind of knew I wouldn't quote him by name. And he said, "Hey, listen, I love Hojo, but we can't put up with this. He's costing us games." So I write that as an anonymous quote. And so the next day, and that was, I think we were in New York, we flew to Montreal. The next day I walk into the Montreal clubhouse, and Hojo grabs me by the arm and says, "Hey, listen," he says, "I'm not going to put up with this from you." And he's got me by the arm. And I'm like, oh my God. And we're kind of over on the side. And fortunately, Darryl Strawberry sees what's going on. And he comes over and he goes, hey, Harper, what's going on? And I had a pretty good relationship with him. He kind of steps in between us and he walks me away. He says, let's figure this out. Hojo, cool off. So he walks me away from it. Otherwise, I was really worried that I was in trouble there. And so 3 or 4 days later, we're in St. Louis. We went to Montreal, St. Louis, and Hojo comes up to me and he says, "Hey, can we talk?" And I said, "Yeah." And he apologizes. He says, "I was just really, I was really upset about the throwing situation." He goes, I was over the top about it. And he said, "Hope we can have a working relationship." And I was like, "Hey, I completely understand." And, from then on, we were pretty good. But, those are the kind of things you dealt with. Johnny Franco one time. And sometimes it wasn't even what you wrote. It would be, this was what usually got you in trouble, was the headline on the back page of the Post, especially when I was at the Post, because they were famous for their headlines. One time Franco blew a save, and the banner headline on the back page was "Down the John" or something like that. And Franco, the next day, he's just screaming at me from across the clubhouse, "Why does your paper hate me so much?" Which, there really wasn't much I could say, but he did understand, and not everybody understands that it wasn't you writing the headline. So I appreciate that he separated me from the headline, but it did make for some difficult times with players sometimes.
Wild stuff, that's for sure. And a lot of people just don't get it these days, and the way they're raised with the way media is, and they're just using social media. So it's interesting to see how that all continued to evolve. But with the Daily News at the time, they make a partnership with SNY for Daily News Live, which was an awesome show with you, Raceman Isola, Joe Beningo, Chris Cotter. So it was awesome times there, Jonah Schwartz. For you, you got approached to do that. Any hesitations by you to jump into doing some TV work?
Absolutely. I mean, I hadn't done much at all. I did I did make an appearance once on Nightline back in the early '90s when Nightline was still a huge show. It was on, so I was on nationally because it was actually the spring of '94. I was contacted by my sports editor. Players were still on strike. I remember they were going to have those replacement teams, which they actually had, and started the '94 season with replacement teams. So the Toronto Blue Jays actually advertised for players to try out in January of '94. You had to be 25 or younger. And so my sports editor saw this online and contacted me and said, "Hey, I want you to go try." He knew I'd played and everything. So, "Hey, I want you to go do this tryout for the Blue Jays replacement team." And I said, "I'm 39. It says you got to be 25." He goes, you can get by. You get by. And it said you had to have ID. So I actually went and had to borrow a birth certificate from the son of a friend of mine who I played softball with. So I had his birth certificate, which was, he was 25, went to this tryout camp, showed him the birth certificate, got through the screening process, which I don't think they really cared. They needed to see the ID. And I still did kind of look young in those days. Went out and it was just one of those deals where they timed you in the 60. And if you were an infielder, they wanted to see you throw from deep shortstop. So they're looking for arm strength and foot speed. And only the top guys were even going to make the cut to play in the kind of what was an inter-squad game. So I stood around for hours, and all I got to do was run the 60 and make a few throws from shortstop. Although I did get called back for a second turn at shortstop, and I thought, oh man, maybe I showed him something. But turned out I think there was some miscommunication about something. So I was sent off after that, and I didn't get to play in the inter-squad game. But it made for a great story because I was standing around with all these guys who, and they all thought somehow they had all been screwed over one way or another in their young, or high school or in college days or wherever, and thought they were, just needed that one break and they were going to break through and become big major league stars still. So it made for a good story. Anyway, Nightline saw it. And so they had me on Nightline. So I did that. Anyway, that's a long way of saying that was the only TV I had done. I jumped into DNL, and I got to give credit to Jonas Schwartz. He was the host. He kind of showed me the ropes and made me feel a lot more comfortable, maybe understand certain, ways the show worked and ways it didn't. You had to learn to speak quickly, make your point, get in and out so the show moved along and not sit there talking for, minutes at a time, and kind of learned how to do that. And we did develop really pretty good chemistry on that show with Jonas, myself, Joe, Bob Raceman, and some other guys. And it was a lot of fun. I really got to enjoy it. And then, went on to do, it's too bad that show finally ended. And, but I still do the Baseball Night in New York show, and I do some of the late night stuff. So it changed my career in a way, and I started to enjoy it. Writing is really hard. I don't enjoy writing. I enjoy the process of doing the story and being done with writing, but I don't like writing itself. But TV is just fun. I enjoy doing the TV.
So do you feel like depending on who you're paired with on sports night, that you actually you really got to be prepared, ready to bring it? I noticed when you and McCarron are on, Anthony McCarron, you guys kind of have some funny butting head chemistry. Obviously, you guys worked together for so long, and you always tend to be on different sides of the equation there. But does it depend for you who you're working with as to what kind of energy you feel you got to bring it on that night?
Sometimes, but that's something that I was also kind of taught early on is, you got to project, you got to have energy. And that, I was kind of always low key in terms of just my personality, unless I was actually playing ball or whatever. So I did kind of learn to do that. And I think part of the show that makes it fun, especially when we, we're back now mostly on the couch together on that baseball night in New York show, is the byplay you can have. You can cut people off and disagree with them. You do have to know some guys are going to take it more personally than others. You got to be careful not to do it. Some understand it's just for the good of the show. I think that's what makes it fun with McCarron. He do disagree a lot on some things because he's way too optimistic for me. We call him Mr. Sunshine sometimes, and that's just his personality. He looks on the bright side of things. I tend to be a little more realistic, so I kind of kid him at times that he's a little too sunshiny for me. We do have some exchanges there, but it's all in fun. And if you understand that, you can have some fun and have some genuine disagreements on the show, and still not get to the point where you're actually kind of going after each other personally. I've seen that over the years, not necessarily with myself, but some guys bang heads and they don't like it when people come back at them. You got to be careful when you get into personal areas.
That's for sure. But I mean, listen, it makes for great TV. I love watching you and the guys on the shows. And for the most part, it seems like there's some really good chemistry there. I do get a little annoyed though when it's like you with like somebody else, and they're like, you know what, John, thanks. Chris, you're going to stick around and talk football. Why can't you talk football or basketball?
Now that's a pet peeve of mine, man. I know it's funny. You get pegged as a baseball guy, and they I don't know. That's the way they want to do it there for the most part. I said, first of all, I covered football. I've covered basketball. I coached high school basketball for 7 years as well. I said, so, and I, on Daily News Live, we talked about everything. I kind of try to remind these guys at times of that, but they just have a formula that they like to stick to. So I'm stuck on baseball, even though sometimes, especially some of the crazy Nets stuff that's going on in the last years, because I'm a Nets fan from when they were in New Jersey. I live in New Jersey. So I wanted to have my say about, Kevin Garnett, Kevin Durant, and what's his name?
Irving.
Kyrie, especially. And they wouldn't let me, they, for the most part, wouldn't let me do that. So I express my frustration occasionally, but it doesn't seem to be doing much good.
It's an uphill battle, unfortunately. Yeah, I think that annoys me as a viewer. But overall, I mean, what are you going to do? Not much you could do there. And now MLB Network, you've done some work with them in the past. How did you get approached to do that? I'm sure it's from your connections you've made, but how did that opportunity come about for you?
Yeah, I don't remember the first time exactly, but I guess I just got a call from one of their producers and asked me if I'd be interested in coming in for that MLB Now show, which is hosted usually by Brian Kenny, who's a really fascinating guy. He's really into the analytics and all that. And so it makes for a lot of interesting exchanges because, you come at him from more of a scouting perspective and he doesn't want to hear about intangibles. So there's a lot of kind of natural not confrontation, but differences of opinion. Fun to do the show. So I enjoyed it. And I was on there fairly regularly for a while. And then also on with Chris Russo, who, I go way back with to his days of when he was on FAN and stuff. And we always have fun. We have a little bit of exchange there. And so it was fun. I haven't been there in a while since it seems like since I was back after the initial COVID issues, but then they went through another period where they weren't letting anybody out from the outside in. And it seems like they haven't opened it up since. So I haven't done as much lately. We'll see where that goes, but it's fun because you get a different perspective. You get to talk a little bit more about what's going on nationally and not just in New York, which is different from mostly the stuff on SNY. We try to limit it to the New York shows because we know that's the New York teams because we know that's where the interest is in the audience.
Well, I see a lot of MLB Now in your future in the off season because when the in-house analysts go home to Georgia or whatever, then they bring in the local guys. So let's hope that works out. John, it's been great having you on here. Last question for me is, what in your life or your career is your I'm right moment? So what we mean by that is a time where you wanted to do something or pursue something. You asked somebody for advice. They said, you know what, John, I don't think you should do that. That's not going to work out for you. And you said, you know what, I'm going to do this anyway. And ultimately you will see why it is that I'm right.
Wow. I I don't know if I had that moment because people encouraged me to get into the writing part of it, as I mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
and that's kind of the path I went on.
So
I guess
it
if
was a
anything,
reverse. It was a reverse, right moment. You said no, no, no. They said go ahead and do it.
yeah, I mean, to me, for me, it goes back to that at high school
Wow.
English teacher, Mrs. Pruden. I still remember her name. I was just a kid who played sports, and that I always thought that I was gonna, if I didn't make it in sports as a professional athlete or whatever, I just figured I was going to go into coaching because all the people that I kind of looked up to, the teachers I looked up to were my coaches and things. And that's kind of what I wanted to do. I always thought. And so this teacher kind of opened my eyes a little bit in terms of the writing. And then when I got into journalism school, I mean, again, I was doing well enough that I started considering, well, maybe I should try this. If it doesn't work out, then I can go the coaching route, things like that. And so took the internship after college, who my high school baseball coach got me the internship, and then just stayed with it. So yeah, it's I guess it's more a reverse thing. I guess, well, I guess you're right. I guess I should try this, and it turned out to be a great thing. I still at times, I mentioned I did go coach high school basketball for about 7 years as an assistant. I couldn't do it as a full-time coach because even though I was in the off season, I still, I had work responsibilities, but and really enjoyed that, and still kind of wonder what I might have done as a full-time coach. But this has worked out pretty well. I always say, it's as hard as it can be, writing on deadline, after games, in press boxes or even during games when you're writing the running story, the place is full of noise. You have to be able to kind of tune that out and get locked in on what you're writing, and that's hard. And it's hard to write on deadline. It's hard to write even after games. Sometimes you have a half an hour to turn your story around and write it by the time you get back up to the press box and write a full through substitute story that gets filled in for the running. That's hard, but I still say, I always say, my standard line has been, it beats working for a living, and that's what I kind of felt like all these years.
Yeah, for somebody who doesn't like writing, you sure did a great job with it. John, we thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. And what we do here is we always give our guests the last words. So if there's anything else that you would like to share, if there's anything else you would like to promote, obviously your fellow colleagues at SNY have always been very gracious and generous with their time with us. So we wish you all the best of luck moving forward. I'm sure Nick is going to give a let's go Mets there at the end. So, but yeah, John, really had a great time. You had great stories, and we really appreciated the time. So if there's anything else you would like to say, by all means, go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. I guess, if I was to say anything, I am a writer. That's what I've done. Still, that's in me. Even though I still do the tape, I am writing for SNY.TV. So I would like, hopefully people to read that and read the column. Don't just read the headline. I just got into a kind of a little bit of a Twitter feud with some people about a Lindor column I wrote. Mets fans are pretty defensive about Lindor, but most of them, they react to the headline. They don't read the column. So read the column. And I would like to say I really do appreciate what SNY has done for my career. I mean, especially, after I was part of that massive layoff in 2018, I was early 60s. I'm older now, but I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And, they offered me the chance to write for their website and continue to appear on TV. And they've been great for my career. I really appreciate what the people there have done for me. So hopefully I can do that a little bit longer. And I appreciate what people watch and people do read the stories. So I'm trying to ease into semi-retirement. The way the Mets are playing, though, I've worked probably more than I was expecting to this year, which has been fun. It's been a fun year to cover. I still think they're in pretty good shape, even though right now they're struggling with the offense. But I think it's going to be a fun race, and we'll see what it brings.
All right, let's hope so, John. This has been great. We thank you so much for your time. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. For our very special guest, John Harper, and my co-host, Joe Calabrese. I'm Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.